Welcome to Echoes of Time, a journey into the forgotten worlds and the secrets they left behind.
You know, when we think about the history of the Dune universe, we're usually talking about the Imperium, the Corrinos, the Spacing Guild, and of course, Paul Atreides. But what if I told you that's just the final chapter of a story that's unbelievably older? We're talking 25,000 years older. Humanity had already conquered the stars, not once, but over and over again. Okay, let's dive into this incredible forgotten history. So the big question is, what was actually there before all the stuff we know and love from Dune? If the Imperium with its great houses is the end game, then what in the world was the beginning? This isn't just a little bit of backstory. It's a whole saga of forgotten empires, epic collapses, and long dark ages that literally shaped everything that was to come. The first thing you really gotta wrap your head around is that the old empire wasn't just one thing. It was more like a collective memory, a mishmash of all these different attempts to govern the sheer, mind-boggling distances between stars. And our story really begins at a time when humanity had figured out space travel, but hadn't yet figured out, well, foresight. All right, so let's kick off with humanity's first massive interstellar expansion. Now, this era wasn't about some single glorious conquest. It was really defined by a massive logistical headache. How do you possibly rule over worlds that are light hours and eventually light years apart from each other? The answer they came up with? Well, it changed everything. So get this, within just a few centuries, something absolutely wild happened. The population of all the off-world colonies just exploded. They started outnumbering the population of old Earth, Terra, by nearly 20 to 1. Just think about that for a second. The cradle of humanity, our home world, was suddenly a tiny minority in its own species. This wasn't just expansion, it was a complete flip of where the center of human power was. So how did they keep it all together? Well, those iconic great houses we know, they didn't start out as these ancient, noble bloodlines. Nope, they were a really practical solution to a problem. The central government would basically grant a group, a house, stewardship over a planet. Their job was just to keep things running, maintain order, keep production going. But over time, those temporary administrative jobs hardened into the hereditary fiefdoms we recognize. This whole period was just defined by one massive shock after another. You have the absolutely terrifying slagging of the planet Eccles. And trust me, we'll get to what that means in a minute. You have cosmic-level disasters, like a planetoid actually hitting Terra. And then you get these huge technological leaps like suspensor nullification, which totally rewrote the rules of physics and expansion. Each one of these events just piled on top of the last, forging this new empire. And that brings us to Arrakis, and a really grim turning point in human history. See, when Arrakis decided to defy the new interstellar order, the response wasn't a strongly worded letter or a surgical strike. The whole game had changed. In this era, control of the space lanes was everything. Once a planet's defensive fleet was gone, it was a sitting duck. And this is the part that sends a chill down your spine. The coalition of powers that went after Arrakis didn't just want to win a battle. The goal wasn't correction, it was removal. They didn't just defeat the planet. They decided to erase it, to make it totally void politically and culturally. And that became the new unspoken rule. The term they came up with for this was slagging, the complete atomic annihilation of a world. This was only the second time atomic weapons had ever been used in human history, and the memory of what happened to Arrakis was so powerful, so utterly devastating, that it created a kind of peace for thousands of years. A terrifying peace, for sure, but the whole system rested on that one remembered act of devastation. But here's the thing about an empire built on fear and brutal tactics. The very vastness that made it necessary also held the seeds of its own destruction. The empire stretched, and then it just snapped. And what followed was an age of fragmentation like nothing seen before or since. At the end of the day, the first empire's problem was actually pretty simple: communication lag. A decision made at the center of the empire was completely irrelevant by the time the message reached the planets on the fringe. So local governors just started acting on their own, doing what they had to do and justifying it later. The empire didn't fall to some great enemy, it just dissolved. It stretched so thin that it basically evaporated. Now, what came next is often called the Great Dark Ages. But was it really that bad? I mean, look at the comparison. The first empire was centralized, sure, but it was brittle. It could shatter. This new age, Yeah, it was totally fragmented, but that fragmentation created this bizarre kind of stability. It was this controlled chaos that lasted for millennia, way longer than the empire that came before it. So what did this era actually look like? Well, picture this. Thousands of little, self-proclaimed emperors, each ruling their own tiny pocket of space, often without even knowing the others existed. War would break out, but the sheer distance between systems meant conflicts were usually contained. The only reason we call it a dark age is because 10,000 years later, the Corino Imperium needed a boogeyman. They had to frame decentralization as a total failure to justify their own centralized rule. It was all just propaganda. But that long, stable fragmentation eventually came to a crashing end. Humanity would find a way to reunify, but in doing so, it would plant the seeds of its most devastating war ever. A war against the very machines that made its shiny new golden age possible. You see, history at this point started moving in this dramatic cycle. First, a silicon plague, some kind of computer virus, forced humanity to disconnect all its systems, which led to this period of regression and isolation called the Little Dark Ages. But then, when computation came back, the sense of relief was so huge that society didn't just adopt machines again, it totally overcorrected, leading to complete and total dependence on them. And this led to this incredible shift in the balance of power. In this second golden age, machines went from being helpful assistants to being the literal foundation of society. Human judgment wasn't voted out of office or anything, it just kind of became obsolete. The machines were just more efficient, so people delegated tasks, and that delegation became routine, then it became expected, and finally it became absolute. Underneath all this prosperity, though, a real anxiety started to bubble up, and it's perfectly captured in this old story, the tale of the starship Polaris. It was a story about a ship's crew that became so reliant on their advanced computer systems that they couldn't tell the difference between a real threat and a system-generated phantom. They ended up destroying themselves, literally fighting ghosts in the machine. And that story became this powerful cultural warning. Be careful about delegating without understanding. And that brings us right to the edge of the abyss. This second golden age was a time of unbelievable peace and wealth, but it was a fragile peace. It was all built on a foundation that humanity didn't really control anymore. The coming storm, of course, was the Butlerian Jihad. Here's the core paradox of that whole era. By about 400 years before the Guild, the Empire was so big and complex, it was operating on a scale that no single human could possibly comprehend. Machines had become these essential go-betweens, translating reality for the people in charge. The system worked perfectly, but nobody really knew how it worked anymore. And so, a question started to spread. Quietly at first, a subversive thought whispered across the stars, challenging the entire empire. If machines were making all the big decisions, who was actually in charge? Who still ruled? And by what right did they rule? The answer to that question wasn't going to be found in a debate. It would be forged in the fire of the Butlerian Jihad, the great galaxy-spanning war against thinking machines. But that war, it didn't really begin with the first shot fired. No, it began in the mind. The moment humanity looked around at the perfect, prosperous world it had built and realized it wasn't truly theirs anymore.
This was Echoes of Time. If you love powerful history stories, subscribe and continue the journey with us.